don't know his name either, but my dad actually worked with that guy.
Oh, that's cool. Wait, what does your dad do?
He was a director a long time ago.
Oh, snap. Okay.
He's been all over the film industry.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool.
So he was directing, like that. He also worked with Under the Gun as well.
Nice. Yo, that's super awesome.
Yeah.
Could I actually make a request off of what Chris started? Do you haven't had any pictures of Billy Crystal in that movie?
I do not. I grabbed anything that was like relatively straight on, and then, but yeah, I couldn't find any of him. And they had a bunch of like really young like Carrie Elway shots that were just glamour shots, and I'm like, ew, like what? No. And this is about as unemotive as I could find this guy's face. Most of the other ones, he was literally just screaming. Anywho, so I'm just going to drag my orthographic in like I would normally. Ideally, so if you're going to start modeling something like a head, ideally you would start out with an actual front-on shot of a relatively neutrally expressioned face. In this case, we're just going to kind of roll with it. So like, again, normally you start with like a front and side face, you like set up all your orthographics, same as you've been doing for the rest of the models of everything else you've been doing. Did I put this on the top view, or have I just rotated stupid? I don't know what I just did. Whatever. Let's go with it. All right, so usually, and again, my spiel for organic modeling is if you're not sure what shape to start with pretty much anything but a sphere. So in this case, I'm just going to do, again, a square. And I will literally set a timer so you guys can see exactly what I can do in 15 minutes. It's going to be really creepy, and again, not look like Vicini. So, I'm going to make a square. It is a square. And I'm just going to go ahead and add one subdivision on either side of this, just to give me, one perfectly down the center line of this object. I'm also just going to zero out my cube really quick just to make sure that it's actually oriented directly in the center of this axis. Move it up, go into wireframe mode, and scale it down so it's sort of head-shaped, ? I'm also going to turn off my grid because I find that very hard to work with. All right, so if anyone has questions as I'm going, just stop me and let me know. But usually for heads, so I find the eyes are like a relatively reasonable place to start out with. I think I'm just like modeling this head laying down right now. It's very weird. But usually well, this is promising. So usually one of the first things I'll do is actually just go in and just grab all of the edges of the model and just round it out slightly so you basically have a cylinder with like a quad top on it, and then find a functional axis of symmetry for your piece. All right, cool. Yeah, so usually the first thing I'll do, I'm going to take an edge loop and I'm going to throw it directly into the center of his eyes, like by the creases. Then I'm going to take one and put it above his eyes, and one and kind of put it, below like the bags on his eyes. I'll also shoot an edge loop directly down through the center of his eyeball, from top to bottom. And then maybe one more or less like kind of somewhere between the bridge of his nose and his eyeballs. So now we have, whatever this weird thing is. I'm actually going to run through and just grab some of the loops on this and scale them down so that they end up being shaped, good lord, so that they end up being shaped more or less like a little mask, like a raccoon mask around his eyes. So you can see that it's sort of formed like this weird little masky shape. I might actually sort of push these up a little bit. And as I go, I usually just sort of go through and kind of like shift stuff around so that it's maybe more the shape that I'm actually looking for, because it's always easier to shape a head when there's less geometry compared to, once you get in like 50 edge loops, you're going to cry if you have to reshape this head. This is the most awkward way I've ever modeled a head. I don't know what window I put that into, but it's very awkward. So again, I'm just kind of going through, like shaping the bottom of the head a little bit. I'll get back to that later. So what I'm going to do now is basically, oh god. I cannot abide his head being that flat. Yesterday when I did Vicini, he ended up being pretty much like Paper Bag Man for most of the demo. So I'm just going to grab this little raccoon eye patch that I made for him, and I'm just going to take that, extrude it, and then with the extrude handle, I'm just going to scale that down, and you can see it's basically making like a little bit of like this sort of bevel inside his eyes. So if I, double click on this loop in here, it's basically making a pure ring of selectable quads directly around his eyes. So this is more like, again, this is just kind of me shaping stuff, but the way that I'm modeling him right now is a little bit more of the workflow when you're making something for animation. If you're just making something to look pretty or like to be 3D printed, you don't need to deform it. It doesn't really matter as much what the topology looks like, but this is like kind of how you usually choose to do things if you're going to animate it, because edge flow does make a difference when you're, shifting bits of the face around. So at this point, what I'm going to do is, once I have this monstrosity, I'm going to grab the little patches of faces that are kind of like right over his eyeballs. I'm going to rip them out of his face. I will then add in a single eyeball into his head. I do find it really, really helpful to add in eyeballs relatively early in the modeling process, because it really does help to shape the head around them. There's also nothing more upsetting than making a really cool looking head, putting an eyeball in it, and be like, crap, this is not even close to fitting an eyeball, which I've done before, and again, it's very upsetting. And then you have to spend like 2 hours like shifting stuff around. I'm going to throw this in a reference layer because I don't want to select it. All right, so we have like creepy eyeball head. What I'm going to do now is just select that loop right around that eye hole I punched out, extrude that, scale it down a wee bit, and I'm just going to pull it out of his face. I think it's easier to work with. So this might be like kind of super awkward to see. Hopefully it's somewhat visible, but I'm just going to grab all of those little loops from that extrude and just sort of basically trace the shape of his eyeball where his eyelids are. And usually this is a thing where if you're modeling for animation, this is common practice, to actually model the eyes either completely closed or partially closed. He looks so shady right now. But you can see, I mean, kind of, this looks like a person, right? Feel free to insult this as I go, because it's honestly half the fun of doing this. But one thing you'll usually do is model the eyelids partially closed, or all the way closed, because it helps avoid texture stretching when you're animating. So if you make the eyes like mostly open, when you close the eyelids, the geometry is stretching a lot, and that will cause pretty noticeable texture stretching, and the fact that it's like on the middle of the face is like obviously not something that's super desirable, which is a lot of times why people will do that. So you can see, I mean, it's sort of becoming more face-like eventually. So I'm just kind of like going through, and like honestly half of organic modeling is just shaping stuff forever. Like it's a little bit tedious, but kind of fun. And one of the reasons I like putting that eye in is because I've noticed like usually like I need to pull this, I think this eye is like actually just enormous. Like this feels irrationally large to me. Maybe just do that. But like a lot of times, so like this little, whatever the area is, like towards the inner corner of your eye, needs to get pushed in really, really far to feel natural. But it feels like doing that feels weird unless you have an eyeball in there. Like it's kind of off-putting how pushed in that can be. But again, so we have something that kind of vaguely resembles a face at this point. And if I wanted to make the eyes look a little bit less trashy, I could go in and just throw in another edge loop. You'll notice it pretty much circles his eye very nicely, which is going to make working with it really easy. And then I'm just going to go through, and this is going to be more or less tracing along wherever like that little skin wrinkle is, like where your eyelid opens and then it kind of like gets sucked into itself, if that makes sense. Like the crease above your eye. This is more or less tracing that, and then also if you're going to put a bag under your character's eyes, I usually also use this loop to help define that. So once we have that, we can go in and actually start making the eye look even less gross. So I'm actually just going to, hello. What am I doing right now? All right, so I'm actually just going to grab this and like push this a little bit farther back into the head, which definitely makes it not less creepy at all. And then again, throw in another edge loop. Since the geometry is set up the way it is, it'll run pretty much perfectly around the eyeball, and I can just pop that out and be like, instant eyelids, or something. Also, go back and like grab these loops, because this is weird for them to be so pointy, like in the corners of the eyes. So I'm just going to push those back in a bit. But you can see, so I mean, the shaping is still like a little bit weird, but if I add one more edge loop in, say like right on the outside of those, you can see that it really quickly does help to define like an actual eyelid on this character. And then again, you can go through like in this area and just sort of like push things around a little bit. Like maybe this is like a little intense in here, so you can kind of play with that to, you know, unharden some of the areas. Like especially like around this bag of the eye, this feels like freakishly aggressive. So I'm just gonna kind of shift things around, and normally, at least for me personally when I'm doing organic modeling, instead of terminating edge loops like a crazy person, I'll just sort of push them around and like push them farther away. Because it helps to keep my topology regular. I like being able to sort of select a loop and have it go directly around the eye. Kind of the same reason that I don't like working with spheres is the reason that I'm sort of set this up the way I do. So now the eyes look like something more or less off of a Skyrim mask, I guess. Show you guys how to do something kind of not completely hideous maybe with a mouth. So first thing I'm going to do is just figure out why I'm not able to select vertices. Cough. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of shaping on the face to make it actually look more like some semblance of a jaw. So you'll notice there's like this little original edge loop just sort of hanging out under my eyeballs. If I didn't have that there, I would just go ahead and add one in. But I do want, again, just sort of for organization's sake, I like that little single loop of quads running directly around the face. It also helps avoid stars, like really big stars under the eyes. So once I have that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to take, which ones? Hang on. All right, so I'm just going to grab these faces. Indecision. All right, so I'm just going to shift this over a little bit. I'm having a moment, sorry. I just forgot how to make a mouth for a minute. All right, so I'm just gonna grab these faces here, the ones that are like more or less kind of covering his mouth. And I'm going to extrude those and do the same thing with the eyes, just scale it down a little bit. It's gonna make this kind of weird bevel shape. And then I'm just gonna delete his mouth. So now he has a gaping hole for a mouth. I did say it wasn't gonna be pretty. So I'm gonna, again, same thing with the eyes. I throw in one edge loop pretty much through the center of the mouth. And then I'm just going to use this awkward gaping hole of sadness to trace out the positioning of, not so much the positioning of his lips, but just sort of to make something that resembles a slit for a closed mouth. This is basically just going to be like the inside of where his lips meet. So a lot of times I'll just sort of make a shape and then just sort of scale it to be flattish. I usually don't go like completely flat, and then just make sure if you do that, there's not like weird clipping or anything happening. But this is, again, you can already kind of see it looks like a sad, very creepy little mouth. And in this case, one thing that I will do fairly frequently is to throw in teeth as I model, because it'll kind of help shape things. Dear God, that's creepy. This feels like something out of like the movie 9. Or just Chibi Voldemort Groot. I'm not sure. But anywho. So yeah, and again, pretty much really similar to the eyes. I'm just going to go through, insert an edge loop here, and this one I am actually going to use to trace out the positioning of the lips themselves. And whether or not you guys choose to work in wireframe or not is largely up to you. I don't know. I don't find it too bad to like figure out exactly what I'm doing, but I know it's kind of like off-putting, I guess, for a lot of people. But you can see, so I mean, again, more or less I've just traced out the shape of the lips. I'm going to take the little inner corners of his mouth and just sort of push them in. So I found that through the few years that I've been doing organic modeling, it does sort of help once if you push that in. For one, it's going to unbunch a lot of geometry on the inside of the mouth as you keep working, but it also just makes the mouth look nicer in the end. So I do find, like, again, to sort of take that very inner loop and like really like push it into the mouth, and kind of wrap it around a little bit. So at this point, I don't know what the profile of a face looks like because I'm a crazy person. Let's see if I actually have like a side view of this dude. Nope. Ah, that explains so much. Nope. Which view am I working from right now? What? oh god, this is his profile. That's upsetting. That is honestly a very depressing profile. Alright, so I'm just going to take maybe all of his lips and just sort of drag them out or something and maybe bring his chin back in. Again, normally you'd have reference for this. Alright, so at that point, bless you, I'm going to just go through and, again, do a little bit more shaping on the lips, which pretty much is more or less the same thing as the eyes. I'm just going to throw in a loop. Maybe push it out a little bit, and you can see that now he has like super creepy, I don't even know what kind of lips that is, but they're just creepy. But if you add in a few more loops into there, it's really going to start to sort of shape the lips. And I've noticed, so it's a little bit, I guess, a little bit hard to describe, but so I'm actually just going to, when I add those loops, I'm just going to hold down Shift, and it's going to, I just need to do a little bit less manual shaping, which I'm always a fan of, but I'm just going to take this loop in here and maybe like push this out to kind of help define the curvature in his lip. So you can already, I mean, it's super creepy looking, but you know, you can already see that that lip has like a lot more volume than it did 10 seconds ago. And again, just sort of going through and like shaping things, trying to make them a little bit less weirdly pointed at this point is pretty much the headspace that I'm in. But you can see, again, something that kind of resembles a lip, more or less. And this is why I was saying, so it's not a bad idea to go through and like sort of push that inner part of the lip in. Because at this point, otherwise I would just have like a bunch of stuff just clustered on top of each other, and you can already see it's like pulling a little bit. The corners of lips are always kind of annoying to manage, but so you just sort of play with this to, oh, cool. So apparently this is what I can get done in 15 minutes on a face. My god, that's terrifying. You definitely see the resemblance, right? Like, this totally looks like Vicini. I actually kind of like it as just like a weird character design, but like, as a human face, it's very uncomfortable. Anywho. Alright, so yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of, you know, keep shaping the lip. If you wanted to add a nose into your character, which hopefully you do, well, I don't know, I guess it depends on character design, but so usually for the nose, I'm just going to go through and sort of like poof out some of these areas in here. And I'm going to, at this point, also add a few more edge loops into my face. So I'm just going to add in a loop going around, like right around the outside of the mouth. So this will define, where's the picture? I'm like 80% sure this is called the nasolabial fold. But like this weird little like crease that goes from your nose to your mouth, those loops are going to help define that. So for organic modeling, if you're doing anything, you know, with a crease like this weird little nasolabial fold thing, crease in an elbow, crease at the corners of the eyes, that kind of stuff, you still do need 3 loops to like help properly define that curve. What did I do to this face? Holy crap. Alright. So I'm just gonna, again, just kind of take these and be like, something vaguely more nose-shaped-ish, kind of. And this is like I'm not going like super hardcore, like I really want this to be a well-formed nose right now. I actually want to add in a few more edge loops that are basically going to define where like the bridge of his nose is. So I'm just gonna go in and again, probably gonna end up being kind of close to the ones I have already, but I'll just throw those in there. And then I'm gonna take this existing loop and be like, blah, and like push it really far back, and do kind of the same thing with these loops here. I'm just gonna like shove them farther back into his head, and you can see that this is again sort of helping to define the curvature of like the cheekbone before it gets to a nose. At this point, I can do what you've probably all been wanting me to do and just grab this nose and be like, glory. And now he has a nose. And I'm done, this is perfect. No. But, yeah, so pretty much just, you know, take the few faces and actually just extrude out the nose. That is, if that was your gut instinct, it was pretty solid in this case. So I'm gonna give him a little bit more geometry to work with. And then I can go through on, oh my god, this is the most upsetting profile ever. You can go through and do a little bit more shaping on his nose to help make it look less like a cardboard box clown nose. So again, sort of like round out the bridge of the nose a little bit, maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time messing with the nose, but maybe do something like this would kind of help slightly. And you can see that, like, again, pretty much with like a few loops and an extrude, we've already gotten something that resembles a nose much more closely than it did 10 seconds ago. So for nostrils, it's pretty much you just grab the little bits at the corner of his nose here, extrude them, and now you have nostrils. These are not pretty nostrils by any stretch of the imagination, but they are serviceable and will kind of do what you need them to do. It just gives you a little bit of extra because like a lot of times nostrils kind of like smush into the rest of the face. So having that little bit of extra geometry in there where you can just sort of like push it and or very gently clip it through the rest of the face is actually kind of helpful. So that's more or less noses. Yeah, and you can tweak the bridge of the nose, and then again, like if you want to mess with the shape on the side of his nose here, you can just go through and kind of like push these loops down, because that's more or less like what they're there to do. This looks absolutely nothing like Vicini. Honestly, half the time I make characters, they all start out looking exactly the same, and then I just sort of put in creepy generic eyeballs and then like make them look more like a person later. So one thing I use a lot when I'm doing organic modeling is actually, just in my tool settings, I'll switch over to component mode, because that way I can just pull these vertices directly out from the face, and it just makes things a little bit easier to work with, especially if you're just doing like a really quick, like I just want his face to be a little rounder. But hopefully you can see, so I mean right now because of these three little loops I have, like this guy, and this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, we do have a very defined crease of going from the nose to the mouth. Which again, if you're animating this guy, like if you need to make him smile, or this is not going to look like a smile at all, so I'm just going to grab half of his mouth and do soft select, and probably stare in regret at whatever this is going to do, but, you know, I can be like, hey, and you can, but I mean, like, it's super creepy. But like you can see that the geometry here is kind of moving in the same way that your skin would, like as the corners of your mouth sort of goes to the sides, it takes that geometry with it, which is again why it's good to a lot of times do mouths like this, and sort of put that geometry in, ringing the mouth. All right, now that horror is done, yeah. So I mean that's honestly more or less faces. So if you're doing stuff for like shaping a chin, a lot of times you'll just sort of grab all of the vertices like towards the bottom of that like weird little mouth circle that we made, and just sort of push them around a little bit until they become more rounded looking. So I'm just gonna grab these guys and be like, cool, this resembles more of a chin shape, yay. It's also good, I think, as you go through, to look at like the shapes on the back of the head, because again, like at this point it's not really round and I have so many edge loops it's going to take me forever to like go back and actually manually shape them. It's not too horrible with the component tool, but it's still just annoying to have to do this in my opinion, so a lot of times I will pay more attention to the back of the head as I go. But again, just kind of like round that out, make it less creepy. Everything about this is still creepy, but you get the point. So that's like honestly more or less how you model a face. Ears, you just tack them on. There's no good way to put ears on. You just rip a hole in the side of the face and stitch them in whatever way you can. Is pretty much what I have learned about ears over the years. The only other really thing that I do kind of have to say is, so I did mention having like, you know, the 3 loops to define this little nasolabial fold here. It's also good to have some additional loops like at the corner of the mouth to help define that, as well as the corner of the eyes. So again, like anywhere you have like a hard crease is somewhere you probably want an extra line. That's a questionable chin. I'm also just gonna run through really quick, and like I feel like it's weird when that mouth fold thing runs all the way down the face, so I'm just gonna kind of like even out some of these loops here, just so it kind of tapers off slightly instead of just continuing. But yeah, so like right now the insides of the eye are like really, really soft and pretty awkward looking. So if you throw in a loop on the top and a loop on the bottom, you can see that you get a much more defined curve there. And you also get a little bit more geometry to play with in the nose area. But yeah, so that's more or less faces. Normally I'd go through and like, you know, shape things a little bit, try to make the overall size and shape of some of the geometry more even. I'd probably go through and like expand, like take some of these guys and like push them out a little bit. Because it does feel a little weird to me that he just has straight lines of geometry running down his face. But I mean, this is like pretty much basic topology for a human head. So anyone have any questions about this? All right. Honestly, I think this is sad. I think this might actually be the best one I've done out of all 3 classes. I don't know why. I'm gonna save it really quick. Face. But yeah. So unless anyone's like feeling super passionate about me like continuing on with this face and doing things, I think I'm gonna wander over to. You guys want to switch to a blade demo really quick? Cool. No. Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. So I've been using symmetry. So right under the deform menu up here, there's this little drop down for symmetry. If it's blue, it's activated. Object versus world is pretty much the same thing as that little demo I did last week with the tool settings for it. So if you had this head rotated at like 45 degrees, if you turned on object symmetry, it's going to mirror it perfectly down the face. World symmetry at that point would pretty much be broken because it's very much not symmetrical. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. And then if you guys ever find, it's like say you find yourself, you know, sometimes I have it where like symmetry will just get super broken to the point where I'm like, I can't fix this and like what's happening, and I'll just get rid of half my head and do pretty much the exact same thing that I did with the plushies. I'm just gonna freeze that. So I'm gonna duplicate my head, scale it on the, yes, I will scale the head on the -Z, and then this is what we have. That's creepy. All right, so I really enjoy breaking faces. It's like quite fun. So I'm just gonna go ahead and freeze the scale on that. It's gonna flip the normal, so again, just mesh display, reverse. And at this point I can go and grab both sides of my face and do a mesh combine. And so it's one piece, but you'll notice like still holes in the head. Usually, if you have that nice line going right down the center of your head, and this is actually why I like this nice line going down the center of my head, but if you have that, you should be able to just do go into edit mesh and do merge. And usually it'll go through and do a pretty good job of like seaming together all the little bits on the center of his face. So again, I really do enjoy having that nice line there because it makes it really easy, if I invariably mess up my model, to go back and actually correct it and just remirror part of the head over. Any other questions on the face? Alrighty then. This thing still gives me the willies. Alright. And that is an expression I hope to never use again.